Bear with me. Okay, so welcome to this Virtual Innovation Center session in collaboration with George James. For those who don't know me, I am Aline Charpentier and I'm the Head of Innovation Support for Nucleus. So I thought I would give you just a little bit of background about why this session now and just a wider context of why we're running them. So Nucleus, as you know, is a membership organization for licensed companies, and we really support our members in their developing journey, if you want. But where we felt that we were really supportive as useful is to really leverage the network expertise to support companies who are on this growing journey. So companies who typically would have raised a bit of money and so become more operational, more active deal maker, and also still thinking about the next step of strategic development. And because we have such a good breadth of expertise within the network, we felt it was a great idea to structure that into a program called the Virtual Innovation Center, where every 6 months we would pick a few companies, so 4 to 6, who we would really support and put in touch with these experts and identify the areas they really want to develop on, whether it's the operational aspect or business development or more strategic development, and really offering them a sort of bespoke precision support, if you want, on their development journey. But then in addition to that, we felt it was a shame to not use this expertise that we have that agreed to be involved in this Virtual Innovation Center for organizing sessions that are a bit wider. And that's exactly the point of today's session. So the Virtual Innovation Center has 6 main areas covered, and I can send you more details afterwards if you're interested, or you can look on Nucleus website. But one of them is around leadership, because obviously as companies grow, it is tremendously important to think about the right mix and structure in the C-suite and board. And further down the line, it's also about recruitment in general and creating cohesion within the team. And so for these topics, we are delighted to have George James on board with us to support us with these discussions as the Virtual Innovation Center support, so talking with the companies involved directly, but also as providing expertise like they are doing today. So I'm delighted to have with me Tarquin, Andrew, and Jane, who will, to start with, give a brief presentation on these questions that we have around this diversity within board and C-suite, identifying gaps as companies grow, but also some tips and solutions on how to fill them, and giving some sort of real case study, experience that they had in their own organization. But then at the end of that, so we'll keep that short, we'd like to open the floor and just get feedback and maybe open the discussion a bit wider to all these big questions that we have around, okay, when is the right time to look at this board makeup, what diversity means, and how does that translate into different type of companies or business models? What does that mean in a more global context or more virtual context for some companies? So it's all that type of question that are very personal to companies, but also tend to be very, having a common ground that we'd like to discuss a bit further, and we would welcome your feedback. So I'll leave the presentation to Andrew now. If you have any comment, question in the meantime, if you can just drop them in the chat box, I'll monitor that. And at the end of the talk, as I said, we'll open the floor as much or as little as you want. You're very welcome to contribute, of course. But then if that covers everything you need to learn, then that's great too. So Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aileen. Can you resume the share so I can put my presentation up for me? Oh, there we go. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for attending today. As Aileen said, we're partners in Nucleus in their virtual innovation center. And what we really bring to the party, our focus is on people and what we've called here building the team and building a winning team. So if I just tell you, and by the way, just to make everybody relaxed, I cut the original 85 slides down to 9, so it's okay. So it's just, this is not a treatise on it all, on the whole subject. It's really just to stimulate some discussion and some questions from the floor. So this is literally sort of 10 minutes to go through what we think are some of the key elements. What are the key elements when you're building a business, early stage, and take a brief look at some of the trends in sort of recruiting that we're seeing. So we're the people partner for the One Nucleus virtual incubator. And as I said, we're going to look at the key elements and the trends in what we call building a winning team. So we'll look very briefly at hiring resources, the who, the what, the when, and the how. And that's everything from full-time to part-time to NEDs to consultants. Look at the leadership and management development, particularly of the company founders. You've got to have a starting point, and you need to know your starting point. And something I'd like to talk about as well, which is creating the company culture. So a new company and cultures. In my experience, I've seen plenty of examples where company culture has grown by what I call omission and not commission. In other words, it's not been a planned event. It's happened by default, and the culture that's emerged over the years has not necessarily been conducive to or supportive of the company strategy, and can actually be very damaging and can be very difficult to change, because you're then into a very complex change management scenario. And as head of our consulting services, we've got some classic examples that we're battling through at the moment with customers. And so we'll take a brief look at some of the trends that we're seeing, and obviously virtual recruitment and onboarding. Really, that's been down to necessity. The power of diversity, inclusion, and equality, which I know is something that Tarquin, for example, is very passionate about. Well, aren't we all? But Tarquin can speak eloquently about that and the importance of building that sort of board or C-level suite. Convergence of science and IT, and that's building multidisciplinary teams. So just as an example, yesterday we're taking on a job to hire a chair in a business that's converging biology and AI, and we're seeing more and more of that. So that's a challenge, a recruitment challenge, to go out and find those right skills and build a team that can work together. And really how the landscape is changing and what top talent are looking for in terms of you attracting them to their business, because you're particularly for early stage ventures, recruitment it's a very competitive, you're in a very competitive space, and you're competing with people to get the talent that you need. Why us? Why here? Well, we've been around this is our 20th year. We've got 3 elements to our business: recruitment, training, and consulting services. Today, we're really here representing the recruitment team. We are very niche. All our customers, without exception, are, if you like, in the life science, scientific, and technology companies. They range in size, they range in geography, but we're basically scientists working with and for scientists. So as I say, we do know your business, and we do know the landscape. And we've helped hire in those 20 years many hundreds of senior executives across the whole range of the C-level suite, in terms of CEOs, commercial, R&D, as says ops, and clinical and regulatory. The virtual, and it's a great pleasure and a real privilege to be asked to support One Nucleus in terms of building up this virtual incubator. And as Aileen said, there are other partners who will bring other skills and other knowledge from legal and finance, and etc. But we're going to focus, and the program will focus on the people side of it, from, as I say, the hiring side of it, developing the leadership and management skills of the founding team. Particularly, you could be involved in a lot of tasks that are new to you, and then also building the right sort of culture. That culture covers it's a very broad church, but in particular, ensuring that as scientists, we're building a culture that's market and commercially aware. There'll be a program from entry to the workshops, as Aileen said, and a program exit. But I want to make the point as well that whilst you can sign up for the program, of course, companies that feel they don't want all aspects of the program can obviously all get support on an as needed basis, on a topic by topic or subject by subject basis, and we're more than happy to talk to you on that basis. But our focus is very much about, say, the people side of it and building this winning team. Things to consider, this comes from obviously our experiences, knowing your starting point. It's all very mum and apple pie, but it is very important to understand the sort of organizational capability and capacity of the founders and whoever's leading the team. And we recognize that's not left to chance. So somebody said the other day, yes, it's a very much about self-awareness, which is true. But I think what we all might individually, we may have a view of how we're seen and what we're good at and what we're less good at. It is very useful, though, to get that confirmed and undertake some form of psychometric testing and structured interviews. So you know from the original management and leadership team, you know, what you're starting with. And then when you're adding to it, you know what to add. Apologies for those of you who don't like sport, but to use a sporting analogy, what you don't want to end up as you build your team is a team full of, say, goalkeepers and no strikers. So that's it's important to understand where you're starting from. And then say then to use that input when you set in respect of your business plans, your goals and ambitions for the business, then in terms of what your recruitment plan is, and work out your plan in terms of full-time, part-time, NEDs, advisors, consultants, etc. And it's very important, I think, to know that. And in our experience, we're doing more and more work with businesses on NEDs and consultants, and not necessarily going straight in and adding people permanently onto the balance sheet and onto the payroll, which is a costly exercise. And so it's about timing. It's about knowing what you want, when you want it. Increasingly, organizations thinking about building virtual models as opposed to in-house models, using contracting organizations, etc., consultants, and getting the right advisors on board early. Developing the leadership and management skills, as said, for a lot of people, it could be leading a team for the first time, or certainly leading a business time. And so there's a whole new maybe set of skills just in terms possibly of recruiting people, interviewing people, leading a team, leading negotiations with funders, customers, the market, whoever. And it can be, and I'm sure you've experienced it, but leadership can be a lonely job sometimes. You've got a lot of stakeholders to satisfy, from employees, your customers, your equity partners, and sometimes it's good to have somebody to talk to just to check that you're doing the right things in the right order. And last but absolutely not least is to just remember that, you know, as the leadership team, you do shape the culture, and I see so many examples, or have done over the years, of where the company culture, as I said, is evolved by omission, and not necessarily into one that supports the implementation of the strategy, and can be exceptionally difficult then to turn around. Again, this is just to stimulate discussions today in terms of the Q&A. There's a whole bunch of things, and I'm sure I've made every single one of these mistakes in terms of hiring. Not really thinking about the skills that need to be brought in to support my own skills, maybe overestimating what I thought I could do. This terrible tendency to hire in your own image because it's comfortable, and it's easy to have a conversation and to sort of get on well with those people that reflect our own beliefs and our own values. Being intimidated by hiring people who are different, maybe culturally or even smarter, and in my case that wouldn't be particularly difficult. Not spreading the net far enough, being too keen, taking the first near fit candidate. Recruitment takes time. It can be a frustrating process, and sometimes we all leave it too long. We haven't thought about our plan, and we don't put enough work in up front. I've got some absolute horror stories, and I'm sure the rest of the team have as well, in terms of being too keen to hire somebody we think fits the bill and not taking up appropriate references. And then some of the other aspects, not taking the time to define the need appropriately, and particularly for early stage ventures. Jane's very keen on emphasizing this, that with early stage ventures, it's very different from hiring into a corporate in terms of the jobs are often very fluid. The business is growing, change could be rapid, it can be very dynamic. So, the people you take on, it's letting them understand and getting them to understand as well that the job you take them on today might be very different next year, and that you may have to backfill them. The role is involved, is almost certainly going to involve. The company might take a different direction. So it's very important that the type of personality and profile of the person that who maybe is, you want somebody who welcomes that sort of environment, maybe welcomes that element of uncertainty, and not somebody who wants the security of knowing what their job is every minute of every day in a large corporate. So the trends in recruitment, which we can talk about today, that we're seeing. So these are the key trends for us that we're seeing. Obviously, virtual recruiting and onboarding, and we've got hints and tips on how to do it. Diversity, inclusion, and equality in terms of how we're building our boards and our management team. So maybe they're more challenging and more representative of the markets that we're serving. Building multidisciplinary teams, as I said, science and computer science in particular. Looking international, spreading the net. One of the things I think we're exceptionally proud of is the size of our network. We have over 20,000 people in our company database. We've got over 20,000 people in our sort of LinkedIn network. And it's amazing how often we use that network to spread our net as wide as possible to find the very best and appropriate candidate for our customers. The changing recruitment landscape, it has changed, and top talent have specific preferences post the pandemic in terms of what they want, what they're looking for, and the sort of job that they'll go for, because you are selling your business, to get these folk on board, particularly where it's all to be proven and the science is still in its infancy. And there are some technical things around IR35. I won't bore you with that if you're not familiar with it, but there is legislation pending which could have an impact on the use of contractors, and post-Brexit changes in terms of hiring people from Europe. I mean, that's a real bit of a rush through, but those are the sort of headline things that we wanted to bring to the party, and to engage in discussion with you either today and say post today. I'll just recap on. I'll make the presentation available. I'll provide it to Aileen, so you're all welcome to take a copy and have a copy of this. Onboarding, it can all go great, can't it, up to the interview? Then it can all go horribly wrong the day that somebody turns up and then they're completely ignored. I don't know if I've ever been quite in that situation, but I might have been. And just as an aside, we have a whole bunch of free stuff on our website. We've got a section on our website called the knowledge base, free knowledge base. There's a whole bunch of documents on there that we've written that you can download for free. We also have other links to third-party documents and videos and stuff, which we think is good stuff, on a whole range of different subject matters. And say there is a section specifically dedicated to recruitment. We've got other documents that haven't yet found their way onto the knowledge base and videos. So we've got other documents around hiring NEDs, pros and cons of hiring consultants, the virtual onboarding process, etc., best practice. We've got some videos that we're starting to post on Vimeo. So there's documentation and stuff that we can access and we can point you to, that you can access free of charge. And last but not least, of course, you can always speak to us. We've got our emails, and Aileen knows how to contact us. So any sort of people-related issues, cultural issues, building the business, building the winning team, there's a whole bunch of stuff there, but we're always here at the either the end of the telephone or at the end of an email for you. Okay, that was it, Aileen. Thank you very much. It was just short, sharp, sweet, and really just throw it open to the floor, and we're here to answer whatever questions that people have, or any or engage in any debate or comments.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. So as I reminded, any comments, question, drop them in the chat box. As Andrew mentioned, that's available for those who missed. I'm also recording the session, so you can always get back to it. And I think it's a good point to these free resources, because when you have like a specific question, then that's that's always good to just go through this, well, specific video or white paper you want to ask.
Yeah, we're always adding to it, Aileen. We're always adding to it, and sometimes it's worth checking with us, because sometimes we've got things that haven't yet found their way onto the knowledge base, but we have them.
Yeah,
they're in process, if you like.
No, definitely, and so kept it short, because when we prepared the session, actually, you said you could spend a day on thinking about all the topics. That was really to tune to any type of specific insight. And I'm sure I have just a general question to start with, because we said that that's focusing on C-suite and board, and so NED recruitment, and actually, you would say, of course, both are important, but if you're a small company, you have to prioritize which one you go first. Which one is the most important to you, and you can't say both again because they're all dependent from one another. Your senior execs, they will be the one delivering your strategy, but then your board is also very important in terms of network and knowledge. So what would be your gut feeling on what is the more important to structure very, very well first?
Well, for me, I don't think there's a single one-size-fits-all answer to that.
The pros and cons of both, if you can.
On the team and where you're starting from, but I'd like to pass that over to get one of my colleagues, either Tarquin or Jane, if you've got a response to that, a practical response from what you see. Is Jane Tarquin?
Yeah, I was going to defer to Jane. I know she's done a lot of work recently as well on the NED and supporting the growth of young businesses, as it were. So, Jane, would you like to take this one? I'm happy to, but I think you're more capable in this area.
I mean, in terms of a young business starting out with its scientific founders, I think the first thing is to take a good, strong look at yourself and understand who you are and what you are able to do well. But very quickly, you need to get onto your board 2 or 3 experienced people that have been there, done it, and got the T-shirt as in the field in which you plan to operate. And to have across that selection of people, you need to have skill sets that you clearly do not have in-house, because unless you've got the understanding of the process beyond where you are at the moment in terms of the R&D process, the manufacturing supply chain and the commercialization, you will not produce a decent business plan. And therefore, without the proper business plan, you won't get the follow-on money that you really need to take your business to the next level. So it's getting that the first thing beyond your business, and you've got some grant money and you've got your IP sorted, is to get yourself 2 or 3 key people around you that can make sure you get it right first time. And those guys will have their own networks, and they will be able to help you bring in other people, consultants. They can open doors. They know what to do and how to do it.
Is it worth saying, Jane, just how many people, how much talent there is out there that is making itself available? Do you mean just from the size of our NED data?
I think the one thing to say is, since we've built the NED database and given the young SMEs access to this incredible pool of talent, is that do not dare not to dream, because there are some incredibly experienced senior people out there that will help your company for a relatively modest day rate, because they believe in what you're trying to do. I have had so many CEOs and even investors say to me, we didn't believe that this business would attract that level of talent to support our business going forward. So you can get some real heavy hitters to help you when you're very, very young and immature, because there are people out there who've been there, done it, got the t-shirt, have a passion for a particular area of science and want to get involved.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, Jane.
And if I can add to that as well, just to Jane's perspective too, is because of circumstances at the moment, Brexit, pandemic, etc., a lot of that talent isn't being contacted internationally. So they're available locally in a way they haven't been for some time. And they're keen to stay local. And what that means, I think, is that we've got enormous resources that may well have been contacted by firms based in Europe and internationally, the US, etc., who will now be very happy to say, I want to stay local, support that local business environment and help develop these companies and these leadership teams.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that kind of answers your original question. Jane, you answered brilliantly, is usually you have a small core team of funders who tend to be very strong, scientifically driven. And maybe the first goal is to look at building these strong advisors, put them in your board or as non-execs, because as I said, it's invaluable, but also it's less committing than having an official recruitment of a new CEO or maybe a CEO or someone who would take forward the business end of it. And as you said, they are incredible people who are happy to be involved. The question I often hear is how do we access them? How do we know that? And I think your database would be a really, really strong tool for that.
And the other thing that we can do for people, if the scientific founder says, probably I'm not the right person to be the CEO, now we want to go out and raise, say, £2 million, we have a number of these guys that will come in as a CEO on a part-time basis and help you run that fundraising. You don't have to go for full-time people too fast in this current environment. And it's often the better way to go is with the part-time interim guys that can help you take a real strong look at your business so that when you do go for the permanent hires, you get it right.
Yes, definitely. And again, more flexible and again, we often underestimate how much we can get out of them or how many of them are actually available there. Just looking a bit at chat box because we had some comments. So just a specific question from Susie that Tarquin got back to about identifying the growing C-suite. So yes, that's something you can help with. And actually that's something, Andrew, you really emphasize on. It's often you're not starting from scratch. So it's identifying who you already have and how you can complement that. And anything you want to add on the importance of understanding your current makeup to be able to find the right next resources?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, it's about building a team, so it's absolutely critical. And it's not just we, but other group. There's plenty of people out there who would, use a variety of structured tools and say profiling tools and structured interviews to help the board or the initial C-suite understand their strengths and weaknesses. And therefore, by definition, understand what gaps, what skills they need to bring into the business.
And so would you say these tools, would you definitely recommend them as, again, as you said, that it's hard to know what you don't know. So it's, yes, there may are things that you are not aware of, but because you don't know them, you would say tools, these personality tests or whatever would be a good way to do that? Yeah,
definitely. Now, I can't speak. I'm sure my colleagues can, whether there's, say, one I might prefer over another. But certainly I know we as an organization use Belbin, and we have somebody in the business who's qualified. You do need people who are qualified to both deliver these these profiles and these tests, and then to respond to and to analyze the results, and then sit down and talk them through. So
an online MBTI test is not
No, you need to have somebody who's going to give you proper interpretation to really understand what the feedback means if you're going to get it right. And the other thing I'd like to add is just because you've got a skills gap doesn't mean to say you should necessarily step back from doing that element of the job going forward, but recognizing you are interested or enjoy it, but you haven't got the full skill set, make sure that you build around you either as an advisor, an external mentor, or somebody who's becomes one of your NEDs, someone that can help and support that learning and development you need to grow in strength in that area.
Yeah, and thank you, Jane. That I think feeds into what Sandy, I think you sent a question about the balancing the needs of the board, as it were, when you've got competing interests of investors, C-suite, in other words, looking in hiring. And one of the things that we can do, but those networks can do, is offer the opportunity just to talk with some people who've been through this process. It doesn't have to involve significant amounts of time or money. And they will give you their insight into this. If you look at something like diversity and skills, we have a consultant we work with regularly, and many of you may know him, Ted Smith, who's done some work both on his HR book that he recently released. But when it comes to things like diversity and skills, it's getting all of those different parts of the decision-making tree, as it were, together to agree that actually you need to focus on bringing people who sit outside your current sphere of influence and network, and the value that can be. Now, we've got data and information we can help provide that will show that if you bring more women into the leadership team, that will have benefits. If you bring people with different perspectives because of their backgrounds and training, again, that's going to be useful. So all of those sorts of things we can do, but the key here, I think, is to bring those people together. And back to Andrew's great point in the slides, make sure it's not by omission. There is an agreed process that you're going to follow, an agreed idea that when you use recruiters or anyone else, you can say to them, we would like to see a diverse shortlist, representative of the market, but also representative of groups that may not be obvious to us right now.
I think the other thing that's critically important is you have a review process. The very best functional businesses will sit down, the board will sit down and at least twice a year say, are we all fit for purpose still? Because as your business evolves, some skills that you've had on the board may no longer be needed, but you might need something new. You don't want your boards to go out of control to be so many people you can't have a functional meeting. But what you need when you're preclinical might be very different to what you need when you're heading into your first clinical trial.
And in reality, Jane, is it something really happening, this sort of annually or twice annually? Yes, let's review the board makeup, and because I totally agree. I think it's a healthy way of approaching it, but in reality, it's difficult to make your board aware that some of them may need to leave.
Well, you need to build it into the whole agreement up front when you hire people. The thing is getting the whole process right first time at the beginning. So the contract with your NED includes the fact that there will be a review. To be honest with you, the best NEDs know when they're coming up to their sell by date. They aren't going to cling on by their fingernails, kicking and screaming. They will almost volunteer to say, I think my job's done. We need someone who knows about manufacturing, or we need to bring somebody in who's an expert on regulatory affairs or market access, or whatever it is the company now needs more emphasis on.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Jane. Just be careful and avoid those people who like collecting executive directorships.
I think the best NEDs show themselves in as much as they don't just want to kind of turn up for board meetings. They are willing to provide this mentorship element to inexperienced teams. They really want to engage. They want to really make a difference and make sure that technology has the best possible chance of success. They're not just there for the governance side of the job.
Yeah,
I think I would, absolutely agree with everything you're saying, and add to that the the post-pandemic marketplace, as it were, means that we've had to adapt. Everyone's had to adapt to, you know, rules about home working, rules about onboarding and how to conduct interviewing processes. And if you add that to the growth of businesses that, again, Andrew referenced in the slides, involved in convergent technology, you've got a situation there where the timelines for a tech company to get, let's say, a sale and some sort of money back into the business can be considerably shorter than for the life sciences. And you might be competing against both of those. So it's crucial that you sit down as a board to have a discussion if the market is shifting in the background, to talk not just about the setup and the process, but also, do we have to adapt how we're delivering our messages? Do we have to adapt our bonus structure, our remuneration structure, our home office working policy to get the best people and keep them? Because, you know, it's a changing market all the time. In the last year, it has been phenomenal how much change there has been in the recruitment market because of the circumstances of the lack of international travel, etc.
Exactly.
And so in your capacity at George James, so the access to NED, that's great, but can you provide this advices or insights into what you just said, Jane, the one you know are really good and the ones who are looking just for, you know, multiple board places? I'm just thinking practical advice, obviously confidentially with the companies, but
yeah, I mean, obviously, if people use our free NED service, then it's over to them to make all the decisions by themselves. But for a very modest amount of money, they can upgrade for us to do a level of screening on the candidates coming forward to make sure that the selection they get to choose from are in the right mindset for the business that they're going into.
Yeah,
you know, we can do some of the checks and balances, but we can't do that for free. We have to take a small income for that, but the support is available from us, as is our executive mentoring services, which Andrew's team offer to the business. You know, they can be very, very valuable inputs as well to a young team.
So important to the company strategy, and especially moving forward to raising further money, etc., that it's definitely money well invested, you would think.
It is. I mean, we've really done our best to provide a series of very low cost, easy entry products for these early startups, because we're passionate about new science. It's the long-term play for us strategically for our business. But we've also witnessed the sad failure of some amazing technology because the teams were wrong. And we don't want to see that happen again.
No, and I suspect the companies themselves don't want either. And also, last practical question, and then I move on to the more interesting discussion. That's interesting, this thing about setting the ground rules with your board, etc. But I'm thinking from a perspective of a very small company. Are there, I don't know, guidelines, or should I say template, or anything that could, you know, put this points you need to consider and you may have never thought about before, of what you need to put in your contract with your non-execs or other? Is there any type of resources like that available? You know,
we have some templates which I've you know, there are other sources of templates like the IOD. You can get access to templates to put contracts together for these sorts of people.
Okay.
And Tarquin's got some thoughts as well.
Well, I was just putting a clap up for saying it's brilliant that you've got those templates, Jane.
No, but that's useful, and that's a good starting point. And again, what you want when you are starting or even growing, because you're not that far, you need just all the support you can. So it's useful to know, and it's often difficult to know where to find it.
I think the thing we'd like to say to people is, because of what we've done and how many miles we've all got on our clocks, if you've got a problem, we're worth a question. Offer us the question. If we don't know, as the AA say, we know a man who can.
Good.
Woman.
Woman, yeah.
Just wanted to comment quickly on a question from Christopher about the site, because that's actually a question I had in mind too, and I'm sure you would have answered. It depends. He's asking just, you know, rule of thumb, what's a good size for a C-suite and a board? And of course, we conscious depends on the size of company, type of company, and Tarquin answered saying, well, you know, that, and also the smaller, the better. But I just wonder if you had any views on that, or maybe examples of far too big teams or far too small.
I like to think a chair plus 4 is good as a minimum to get the spread of skill sets around the table. I would have thought at a board meeting, anything more than 8 gets very cumbersome to manage. The only teams I see bigger are the scientific advisory boards that we build, and they can be a dozen people that clients will select in that sort of environment.
Thanks, Jane. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was going to say in my response to Christopher about having a separate part of the business for dealing with the sort of issues that actually may not be pertinent to all of the board can be really helpful too. So thank you.
And so, but that's actually a really good answer. You said between 4 and 8.
Yeah.
Plus the chair.
But you may have, as the guys say, you may have separate advisory panels or boards.
Of course, yeah, the scientific
dealing with quite complex, you know, obviously,
of course,
scientific issues. But that's more than enough people, I think, to you know, fulfill the duties of a board in terms of their responsibility to all the stakeholders, you know, including the investors, ensure that the strategy, they're on track with the strategy. You know, they're being responsible with the investors' money. They have a proper plan. Is that plan on track, or is it not on track? If not, what are we doing about it? Are we managing the business risks? And really, you need a relatively small, capable team can do that.
Yeah.
And then you just pull in other consultants for specific requirements. Like most people only ever have HR as a part-time consultant. A lot of small businesses only have a medic or a finance guy as a part-time element. They don't necessarily, they'll probably have someone on the board who's investor savvy, probably the chairman, but the more detailed day-to-day finance is nearly always just a part-time consultant, and it works well.
I'd just like to add something to that, because I think it's worth noting again, current situation. There'll be a lot of people out there who are marketing themselves as consultants at the moment, either as interim managers or similar. And it's just worth a kind of note of warning, I guess, is that the true interim manager, as it were, or interim consultant, will have a track record, which you'll be able to clarify and do due diligence on and so on. Correct. There'll be a lot of people right now, and we've seen a number of them, who are essentially looking for a permanent job and will use a route into a company on a part-time or interim basis to get that permanent job. I would always say, you know, it's fine if you go in knowing that's the case, but if not, just considering the motivations being very different. The motivation of most interims is to do the job, get in there, get out of there, and then move on to the next project with a very good referral and recommendation behind them. Obviously, the person going in for a full-time job will do something quite different. They'll want to become entrenched. They want to be there so that eventually they get offered that full-time role. They may not want to upset the apple cart, do the sorts of difficult jobs that sometimes you need an interim to do, particularly at a stage of development in a company where you might want some disruption. And that's where interims can be really useful. Bring in and make the disruption, move on. So just mention that, because the market at the moment is, there are a lot of people out there marketing themselves as interims who aren't true interims as I would appreciate them.
No, I think that's a very fair point, Tarquin, to guard against those people who are going to look to create a job and sometimes manufacture one where it's simply not required. Yeah.
Thanks. So just reflecting on this board question, hinting into, well, Sandy mentioned you two, Andrew, it's okay, let's say 4 to 8. But within that, you have to account for some you may not have directly elected, so investors or other. How do you deal with that first? So maybe some of these boards are not your first choice, and so you have to build around it. And to bring in the diversity we mentioned earlier, that is, well, everyone knows now, is convinced that it's the way forward, but maybe more difficult to achieve if you have some of this board makeup not your choosing. So are there, I don't know, tools or again, ways of accessing or identifying better and different skills within your board to fulfill diversity, again, of background, gender, all diversity?
Yeah, I'm sure, Jane and Tarquin have got some observations on this. I'll just give you my, I think that's a difficult issue from experience where, and it's one of the challenge, I think it's one of the potentially the biggest challenges for inexperienced CEOs, and that's dealing with the investors. And it takes, sometimes it can take a very strong character, and I think it's where sometimes the CEO needs support through a mentor or a coach or something. You can be, if you're clear and as a board, as the founders, the sort of business that you want to build, how you want to build it, the direction you're going in, there sometimes can be some quite difficult challenges, and that you're not knocked off that strategy by the investors. And sometimes, it starts off okay. Sometimes it gets a bit more complicated when, as the business matures and maybe other investors are added, and they all then start to bring slightly different viewpoints to where you should be going and what's important, both in terms of the business strategy and, as you say, the culture you're building and the diversity and the sort of board that you want to build. So you've got to start out as you mean to carry on, but it can be a real challenge and that's why I say, being the CEO can be a lonely place, and that's why sometimes it's good to have other people and mentors and people independent of the business, and like your Neds, that's where the Neds can play a big part as well, who can give you that support, and hopefully as well that you've got you've also hopefully got a significant shareholding, and you can put your foot down and say, this is the business I'm building, or we're building as a team, and why.
I think the most important thing, if you are a founding CEO, if you want to go at least the whole way on the first wave of your product development, don't do it without a mentor, because if you will fail, you will absolutely fail. You either step back to the CSO, CTO role and bring in a CEO that's strong enough to face off the investors and manage those situations that will come about, or you have to have proper external experienced advice to make sure that when you tackle those challenges, you're using the right approach and the right words.
Tarquin, have you got anything to add?
No, I think you summed it up perfectly. That's great. Thank you.
Good. And then, so we're talking about diversity, and you will be on the camp that the people element is very important in companies. So again, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but what's the best makeup for a C-suite? And shouldn't we see more people representative in the C-suite? Often HR, whether is not necessarily in the strong makeup, is beneath the COO or other. I don't know, what's your view on that, on having more chief people officer, for example? Would that help that?
You don't need an HR person on the board until you've got to a reasonable number of people in the business.
Which would be roughly?
I would even be saying not much before you've got to about 50 people.
Okay.
Yeah, I think at that point you can start to think of HR on the board, because you've then got to really start to get serious about personal development, retention strategies, those sorts of things. A lot more policy work needs to come in as you get bigger. There's a lot more complications to the reward packages, pay reviews, all of those things get very, very much more complex. The early board, you need your science, you need your finance, and you need your commercial strategy. If you're medtech or diagnostic, you probably need manufacturing and operations in there pretty early on as well. You guys got a view, Andrew or Tarquin?
Oh, it's funny, Jane. Exactly the same number went through my head. I think it has to be quite a sizable business as you say, you don't need HR on the board. You can access HR resource. There are, as you say, there are fantastic people out there, consultants, advisors who have the experience that you can hire as and when needed. No, I think that's spot on, Jane. Absolutely spot on.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate on this one. I'm an advocate for getting HR or people stroke talent leads in relatively early to help inform that culture, because they're often the closest to the decision making on the hiring at an early stage. They'll be involved in probably all of the hires and potentially involved in the creation of the contracts, and obviously that includes the behaviors that are rewarded. The way behaviors are rewarded leads to natural cultures and ways of working that come from that and behavior. So my view tends to be, actually, I'm an advocate of getting somebody within that area. It doesn't have to be HR specifically, but having that strong skill set as part of the board earlier stage. That's my take, and I appreciate what you're saying.
My comment to that, Tarquin, is though that doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who wears a HR hat. I don't think, say it could be for the CEO, could be their coach or mentor, so I think that can come from other routes. It might come from one of the NEDs.
So that's having the people element, but potentially dissociated from HR, and definitely not associated with that function. I think that makes sense.
There's a lot of very experienced senior people that I've seen in my NED network that have done some great things in building teams and cultures. You need your HR expert more for the almost more early on for the legalities of the things you have to pay attention to. You don't get to be very big before you've got to have maternity policies and all of those sort of real core things. And a good HR interim or part-time HR has all the templates. They can bring everything you need from that side of thing to the table.
Yeah. The way I separate this out sometimes, Jane, is I talk to businesses about what I call value destroyers, and all the things we've talked about setting up a winning team and getting off to the right start and bringing in all the right people. What you often find, I think, and I've actually seen it in practice on more than one occasion, particularly in scientific and technology based businesses. There's a side to business which is, I just say, it's business administration. And there's a lot around that quite frankly, I don't like it. And I know an awful lot of people who are leaders and scientists and visionaries and on the commercial side aren't interested either. But there's a whole bunch of stuff to do around administering a business. The governance, the contracts, as Jane said, getting the right contracts with your NEDs. It can be things that people never think about if they've got a lot of shareholders, having a shareholders register and stuff like this, that when there's potentially a buyer at some later stage down the road, you've got to contact all those shareholders. They've gone, you haven't kept track of them. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that at some stage, and it can come up in due diligence when you want to raise finance, it can come up in terms of when you want to exit. A well-administered business, and that covers a whole bunch of things, it's a damn sight easier. And it can go the other way. It can actually sometimes make it extremely difficult. And I call them value destroyers, and they're often the things that a lot of us are just not very interested in. And if you know that, you should get somebody in or have access to somebody who's good at it and likes the administrative side of business.
Yeah.
Good
record keeping, very important.
Yeah.
No, definitely, and I think it's diverging a bit, but that's the very important but less sexy part of the business that you need to have.
Sometimes firms' accountants will do it. They'll keep the board minutes or
but as you said, I think it's the part where if that's not your thing, and I'd say a vast majority of strong tech-driven businesses, that wouldn't be their favorite part of the thing, is just find someone to do it for you. So contract someone, and as you said, there are plenty of experts.
That's right, and make sure it's right.
Yes, but again, I'm sure you have many references on that. But I think there was more, yes, on the people question, and Tarquin answered to it. It's the importance of having someone people-minded, even at the early days, and even if it's not within a HR function, to make sure you have the best leadership. But then you also, when you start recruiting, so you become big enough to build scientific teams or other, to create the right attractiveness for your company, because I think what we're seeing a lot, especially around Cambridge, it's great, it's full of talent, but it's extremely competitive. And so it's how you stand out of the crowd and how you make your company just look a great place to work because you're doing good science, etc. And this is where having some people-minded people, even early days, is not a bad thing.
The one thing that's come about as a result of the last sort of 12 months or so we've all lived through is that we've now worked out we can do a lot more virtually, so that for every company, wherever you're situated, you're not necessarily having to compete now just for local talent. You can have your talent flung far and wide and still do a great job and have a great business. And in reality, George James is a complete success story from that place. We've always been virtual, and our people are spread around Europe. You know, we're sat in 3 completely different parts of the UK, the 3 of us at the moment, and we've never had an office. So you know, don't just think local anymore, because you know, if somebody can do 80% of their job working from home and only needs to be in the business once in a while, then if they're up in Manchester and you're in Oxford, it doesn't matter. You could probably have someone based in Paris once we can travel again.
And that's ticking the diversity box. So
it ticks the diversity box. It gives you much more access to choice. You know, you can have people from other countries, other cultures, and, you know, and it's, you know, I already put people on boards from, say, US on a European board and vice versa, if the company thinks part of their go-to-market strategy will involve tackling those markets further down the line.
And I think I'd just add to that, Jane, it's such a good point, is, and again, Aileen and One Nucleus, with some of the supporters and companies that you've got in the network, are really useful for helping out with some of the employment issues for contracts. You know, if you do employ someone in France, the tax issues, whether they're having to pay tax in France or here, if there is a, you know, remuneration part of it and so on, all those sorts of things. There is information out there, and free sources of information via, I know, Aileen, some of the special interest groups that you have within One Nucleus, but also some of the supporters of the VIC as well would be able to help with some of those things too.
Yeah, I mean, we've long had access to a couple of companies in Europe that do payroll for people who have no legal entity in a country. So you can have a single employee in a country and they do everything for you. They do the local contract, they pay all the taxes, they'll sort out cars, they'll sort out mobiles, you know, so just, you don't have to be frightened of tackling people in other countries, because it's not that hard to do with the right support.
The only slight, I agree with all that, Jane. I'll just, it's probably not relevant to anybody, but we have tried to help to do some recruitment for a Swiss company, and that has proved spectacularly complicated because it was a very senior person in a position of control, and we, through their legal people, we just couldn't get anybody that, other than they wanted a Swiss national or somebody who was prepared to live in Switzerland.
Yeah, I mean, that happens, that clients insist, but you know,
exactly difficult for reasons of compliance with their tax authorities.
Yes, I mean, there are situations where you have to have somebody from a certain location, but
yeah,
not always.
And I'm sure you've found a way around that. I'm just conscious of time. So just a quick comment from Christopher in the chat box when we were talking about HR people. So he was asking if drawing a distinction between official board members and observers in these comments, for example, HR person at board level. I'm not the expert, but say yes. Is that what?
Not sure.
I don't think I've understood the question.
I understand the question. What I can say, of course, is there is a distinct difference between somebody who is registered at Companies House as an executive director,
Yes.
as opposed to anybody can sit on a board and anybody can be invited to a board meeting and anybody could have the title director.
Yeah, I think that was the distinction, yes, between these official board members with a HR people hat and either consultants or observers or someone that, as you said, is not on Companies House.
Lots of people have the word director on their business card.
Okay.
But of course, there's to be a company director.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the same everywhere. Where you're registered at Companies House, you sign the appropriate paperwork. You are bound by the Companies Act.
Yeah.
And you have a whole bunch of, same as for NEDs, you have a whole bunch of legal responsibilities in terms of how that company performs its duties and how it's run.
Yeah. And so I think on that regard, I was to say, that's not necessarily a director who looks after the HR or people element.
No, as you get bigger, then your HR person would probably go to most board meetings for a part of the meeting to make the right contribution at the right time.
Yes.
But not the whole meeting,
Good. And just finish, because also, yes, it's 2 o'clock already, but just a last, I like this finishing question about giving a quick example, the three of you, of, and that's for the others to learn, about the biggest mistake you would think, the people biggest mistake that companies you worked with have done. If you have like a quick snapshot example of what not to do or to avoid doing.
Ooh.
You want to start, Andrew?
Yeah. Well, for me, what not to do?
Yeah.
It's just simply not hiring being too quick and too keen to hire and not taking time to get the right candidate, the appropriate candidate, because you feel under pressure. You're under business pressure. You're under pressure to fill a job. You want it done. You've got a role. Shareholders are shouting down the phone at you, and you make a knee-jerk reaction, and they turn out to be the wrong person because you haven't followed the process. You know it's wrong.
Thanks.
You do it, and it all turns to dust. And I've done it.
Yeah.
I've been levered. I've been lent on by the shareholders to recruit somebody.
Okay. So resisting pressure is a quality. Jane, any?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really is. If people, I've seen some of the biggest mistakes when people have brought in ex-mates, someone they worked with in the past, and because they thought they knew each other, they didn't go through a proper recruitment process, and it was an unmitigated disaster because the skill sets weren't right or the personality fits weren't right. So that's one big disaster. And the other thing I've seen unravel very rapidly is when somebody's been hired that is a manager who cannot delegate. And it completely destroys an effective team if the team is no longer allowed to contribute at the level that they're able to. And good people leave very quickly if they're micromanaged.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jane. Tarquin, do you have a disaster story to share before we finish?
Yeah, just very quickly, I think it follows on what both Andrew and Jane have said. I think from my perspective too is just remembering that whoever you're hiring isn't isolated, that you need to have that vision that you can transfer to them. They will have likely partners, friends, family, a network beyond. And if you get that message right with them when you're hiring, that they can take that back, that can have a huge positive impact when you next go to market. I think sometimes people forget that if you're hiring at a senior level, that word of mouth gets out there very fast. And again, hiring the right sort of person with the right sort of track record and network will help accelerate the direction of travel for your business.
And I'll just add to that, remembering when you're hiring, the people you say no to and how you treat them sets the culture for how you're perceived in the marketplace. It's your brand. If you just only deal with the person you want to hire and don't do nice thanks but no thanks to the people you don't want to hire, people tell bad experiences very, very quickly to their mates, far more than they will tell about a good experience.
Reputation. That's really
so think about your reputation in every recruitment project you do and treat people fairly and with respect. And if you can possibly spend a few minutes to give someone some proper feedback, they so appreciate it. even if you said no to them.
Thanks. That's a really nice human note to finish on, and at all levels. I think that's
At every level, doesn't matter whether it's junior to the higher.
Yeah.
You know, people appreciate honesty and feedback. That's something they can take away and use for doing it better next time.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so I think we overrun slightly, but I thought that was interesting. I had a really interesting time. And as a follow-up, I'll send you the link to that, so then you can just watch the video. You'll have Andrew, Jane, and Tarquin's contact if you want to get in touch with them.
Yeah.
I'll dig into these templates or documents because I think they're really valuable. So just to make them available for companies, everything that you are sharing for free, that's great, and that's saving time. And as far as the Virtual Innovation Center is concerned, we should have our next webinar next month, date to be confirmed, more around deal preparedness and working on due diligence. So completely different topic, but none less important. So thank you very much, everyone. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was really interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you for
very much.
organising.
Bye.
You're very welcome.
Great visit.
Bye.